Amelia Hart thought she had escaped Victor Dane's dangerous shadow, but when the haunting signs returned after his death, she realized the real threat had been much closer and far more patient. All along, Amelia Hart's disappearance began. Like a whisper, small, almost forgettable, the kind of thing people assumed would resolve itself within hours. On the day she vanished, the coastal town was alive with its usual rhythm. The hum of fishing boats returning to harbour, the laughter of tourists strolling the boardwalk, the scent of salt and fried dough drifting from beachside vendors. Amelia had been part of that rhythm, moving through the morning with the same predictability she always did. She left her apartment just after sunrise, wearing her favourite blue running jacket, and was spotted jogging along the wooden boardwalk, her ponytail swaying with each step. It was a path she'd run countless times before, always in the same direction, always returning within an hour. But this time, she never came back. By mid-morning, her phone still sat on the kitchen counter, its battery indicator glowing green from a charger. Her purse was exactly where she'd left it, hanging neatly from the back of a chair. A half-drunk glass of water sat beside an open book on the table, as if she'd planned to finish her run, come home, and pick up right where she'd left off. When she failed to show up for her afternoon shift at the local art gallery, her co-worker assumed she was sick or delayed. Only when Amelia didn't answer her phone that evening did concern begin to grow. The first strange detail surfaced just before sunset when a cafe owner, cleaning tables after the dinner rush, noticed a silver hatchback parked near the curb. It had been there since morning. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's seat was pushed back slightly, as though someone had stepped out quickly. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no torn fabric, nothing out of place except the fact that the car's owner was missing. Police were called, and within an hour, the quiet street transformed into a hive of flashing lights and hushed conversations. Officers combed the area, checking nearby shops and alleyways, but found nothing that suggested where Amelia had gone. The search expanded to the beaches, the dunes, the winding streets beyond the boardwalk. Volunteers joined in, carrying flashlights that cut thin beams through the gathering darkness. The sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the distant shouts of searchers calling her name. Every lead turned to mist. No one had seen her get into a car, walk away, or speak to a stranger. There were no security cameras on the stretch of boardwalk she favoured, leaving the last confirmed sighting of her frozen in time, a jogger under the morning sun, blending seamlessly with the crowd. The following days, rumours bloomed in every corner of town. Some said she had been abducted by a tourist who noticed her running alone. Others believed she had simply walked away from her life, tired of the same faces, the same routine. But those who knew her best pushed back against the idea. Amelia loved her life here. She had no debts, no known conflicts, no reason to vanish. Still, the absence of answers gnawed at the edges of the investigation. Every day that passed made the possibility of finding her alive seem smaller. Beneath the surface of official reports and speculation, there was something unspoken, a sense that this disappearance was not random. It was too clean, too careful, lacking the chaos most crimes leave behind. Whatever had happened to Amelia, it had been planned with precision. And somewhere, out of sight, someone knew exactly where she was years before the day she vanished. Amelia Hart had unknowingly stepped into the orbit of a man whose presence would alter the course of her life. His name was Victor Dane, and in the circles where his name was whispered, it was always tied to trouble. He was a man who could draw people in with ease, well-dressed, well-spoken, with a smile that concealed the rot beneath. Amelia first met him at a friend's gallery opening, the kind of event where strangers mingled over wine and small talk. At the time, Victor was nothing more than a passing acquaintance, a man who asked about her work and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. There was no reason to think that their encounter would become anything more than a footnote in her memory. But Victor had a way of appearing again and again. He stopped by the gallery on slow afternoons, claiming he was in the neighborhood. He invited her to dinners where the conversation moved too quickly, skipping past the surface into topics that felt strangely personal. For a few weeks, Amelia allowed the connection to grow, not suspecting what lay beneath his charm. She only began to sense it when she caught glimpses of a darker side, an unsettling sharpness in his eyes when things didn't go his way, the way he seemed to know details about her life she hadn't shared. The truth surfaced by accident. One night, while helping Victor find a file in his office, she opened the wrong drawer. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a violent double homicide in a nearby city. The photograph of the victims was marked with faint pen strokes, and the article's margins were filled with cryptic notes. Her stomach tightened, but she said nothing, pushing the drawer shut as if the sight could be erased by closing it. Later, she overheard his phone conversation, his voice low and cold, discussing someone who had talked too much and needed to be handled. The reality settled in slowly. Victor wasn't simply a man with bad temper. He was entangled in something dangerous, something that ended lives. She never confronted him, but her withdrawal was immediate. Calls went unanswered. Excuses piled up. It didn't take long for Victor to notice the shift, and his reaction was swift. The friendly visits turned into unannounced appearances outside her workplace. Anonymous notes appeared under her door, short. Messages written in block letters, telling her she was being watched. Photographs arrived next, grainy shots of her at the grocery store, walking home, even sleeping on her couch, the angle suggesting they were taken from outside her window. Her fear deepened when she found a dead bird on her doorstep, its neck twisted, placed neatly on top of an envelope containing nothing but her own name. She thought about going to the police but stopped herself. There was no proof linking Victor to any of it, and part of her feared that involving authorities would provoke him further. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the harassment stopped. The notes ceased. The photos stopped coming. Months passed, and she began to believe he had found a new target or simply grown bored. For a time, life settled back into its familiar rhythm. She jogged along the boardwalk again, worked her gallery shifts, met friends for coffee without glancing over her shoulder. But fear leaves traces that don't fade easily. Even in her calmest moments, she felt the shadow of Victor Dane lingering, as if he were a ghost watching from a distance. That shadow grew heavier when she learned he had been released from prison after serving a short sentence for unrelated charges. Not long after, the small signs began to return. An unfamiliar car parked across from her apartment for hours, the faint scent of his cologne near her front door, a shadow in the corner of her vision that always vanished when she turned to look. Amelia didn't need to see him to know the truth. Victor was back, and this time, he wouldn't let her slip away. Amelia knew that waiting for Victor to make his move would be the same as signing her own death sentence. The small hints of his return were enough to confirm what her instincts had been screaming for weeks. She had to disappear before he closed in. This time, she wouldn't just leave town for a few days or change her routine. She would erase herself. Entirely. It was the only way to stay ahead of him. The plan began quietly. She withdrew small amounts of cash over several weeks so it wouldn't raise suspicion. She sold personal items online under a fake name, keeping the transactions limited to things that wouldn't be missed: jewelry she never wore, old electronics, a few pieces of art she'd collected over the years. Through a distant acquaintance she barely trusted, she was introduced to someone who specialized in creating new identities. The man didn't ask questions. Within 2 weeks, Amelia Hart became Elena Cole. Her hair was dyed a deep brown that almost looked black in certain light, and her wardrobe shifted from bright, airy colors to muted grays and earth tones. Even her posture changed. She trained herself to walk a little differently, to carry her weight in a way that wouldn't immediately register as familiar to someone watching from a distance, leaving the coastal town where she had spent her entire adult life was harder than she expected. She left behind her apartment without telling the landlord, her job without giving notice, her friends without so much as a text. She boarded a bus under her new name, carrying only a single suitcase and a worn leather backpack. Every mile that passed between her and the ocean felt like another layer of her old life falling away. She ended up in a small inland town no one she knew had any reason to visit. The streets were quiet, the pace unhurried. She found a modest apartment above a bakery, its windows facing an alley instead of the main street. The rent was low, and the landlord accepted cash without asking too many questions. Work came in the form of a late-night cleaning job at an office building on the edge of town. It suited her: empty hallways, no co-workers, and no one to notice if she came or went. A few minutes early or late, Amelia avoided attention at all costs. She paid for everything in cash, never used her old phone, and avoided places with security cameras when possible. She chose her grocery store for its dim lighting and the fact that its aisles had no clear view from the front door. She never took the same route home twice in a row, sometimes circling the block 3 times just to see if anyone was following. At night, she kept her blinds closed and her lights dim, her ears tuned to every sound in the hallway outside her door. Despite the careful planning, paranoia became her constant companion. A cough in the stairwell could make her heart race. A sudden knock on a neighbor's door would leave her frozen, listening, waiting to see if footsteps stopped outside her own. She thought about Victor every day, wondering if he was searching for her, if he'd managed to get her new name somehow. She tried to believe she had vanished completely, but the fear had burrowed too deeply into her. Weeks turned into months. The routine began to feel almost normal, the edges of her anxiety softening just enough to let her breathe. She learned the bakery's opening hours by heart, recognized the sound of her neighbor's squeaky door hinge, and began to find small moments of peace in the quiet streets at dawn. But even in those calm moments, a voice in the back of her mind whispered that safety was temporary. She didn't know when or how, but she was certain that the past she had buried was still moving toward her, and it would find her again. It began with something so small that Amelia almost convinced herself it didn't matter. One morning, as she stepped into the hallway to head to work, she noticed a folded piece of paper lying just outside her apartment door. There was no envelope, no name, just 4 words written in jagged black ink: "I know you're here." She stood, frozen, her breath caught in her throat, the sound of the bakery's delivery truck rumbling faintly in the background. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, but the message was clear. Her first instinct was to tear it up and throw it away, to pretend it was some kind of cruel prank. Instead, she slipped it into her pocket and left for work, forcing herself not to glance over her shoulder until she reached the main street. That night, the noise started. Slow, deliberate footsteps outside her window, pausing between each step as if whoever was out there wanted her to hear. She pressed herself against the wall, every muscle tense, counting the seconds between each sound. After a minute, they stopped. She waited in silence, barely breathing, before finally daring to peek through the blinds. Nothing. Just the faint glow of the street lamp in the alley and a single plastic bag caught in the breeze. But she knew someone had been there over the next few days. Small disturbances piled up like a growing weight pressing down on her. A cigarette but appeared on her balcony one morning, still faintly warm when she picked it up. A faint scratch appeared along the edge of her apartment door, as if someone had tried to pry it open and stop halfway. One night she came home to find the lamp on her bedside table turned slightly, angled toward the door instead of the bed. She had no memory of moving it. The thought of going to the police gnawed at her, but she knew it would unravel everything. To involve them would mean explaining who she really was, why she had a new identity, and why she believed a man from her past might be hunting her. It would mean handing over control of the one thing she still had, her ability to stay hidden. If Victor was behind this, contacting the authorities could give him exactly what he wanted: confirmation of where she was. Her behavior began to change. She reinforced the locks on her door, adding a chain and a metal bar across the inside. She boarded the lower half of her bedroom window, leaving only a narrow strip of glass at the top so she could still glimpse the sky. She stopped walking. Home alone, waiting until a small crowd left the building where she worked so she could blend in and slip away unnoticed. Sleep became a rare luxury. Even when exhaustion finally pulled her under, she often woke in the middle of the night with the distinct feeling that she was being watched. One evening, as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she heard faint breathing in the darkness above her. She froze mid-step, her eyes scanning the shadowed landing. A floorboard creaked, followed by the sound of a door shutting softly. She forced herself to keep moving, walking past her own door before circling back minutes later, heart pounding. The tension was no longer an invisible weight in her chest. It was a living thing, pressing against her from every direction. Whoever was watching her wasn't trying to rush the process. They were patient, deliberate, leaving her to unravel piece by piece. And the worst part was the growing certainty that this wasn't just about finding her. This was about letting her know she had been found, and that whatever came next would happen entirely on their terms. Amelia had been living in a constant state of alert for weeks, every day a careful routine of checking locks, scanning faces, and avoiding empty streets. She had convinced herself that the only explanation for the notes, the noises, and the strange disturbances was Victor Dane. It was his style, slow intimidation, a deliberate breaking down of resolve before making a move. She began to prepare for the only solution she could see, disappearing again. She started stashing cash in a tin under the sink, mapping bus routes to towns even smaller and more remote than this one, and researching rooms for rent that didn't require ID. Every plan was built on the assumption that she had to stay ahead of Victor at all costs. Then, one night, the news changed everything. She had been cleaning the office building where she worked when she overheard the security guards' radio playing a local news segment. The voice was casual, almost attached, as it read the headline, "Former inmate Victor Dane dead at 42. She froze mid-step, the mop dripping water onto the floor as the details came through. A bar fight in another city. A single blow. To the head. Pronounced dead at the scene 3 weeks earlier. Amelia stood there, trying to process what she was hearing. If Victor had been dead for nearly a month, then everything she'd experienced, the notes, the footsteps, the intrusions, couldn't have been him. The relief she felt was strange and incomplete. The threat she had believed was chasing her was gone, but that only left a bigger, more unsettling question. Who was behind all of this? If it wasn't Victor, then someone else had been watching her closely enough to mimic the terror he once inspired. A few days later, the answer, or at least a piece of it, arrived in her mailbox. Among the usual stack of flyers and unpaid bills was a plain, unmarked envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. Amelia's stomach turned to ice as she stared at it. The image showed her standing at the kitchen sink in her old apartment, back in the coastal town she had fled. The timestamp in the corner told her it had been taken the night before she disappeared. The angle of the shot was impossible to ignore. It was taken from inside the house. Someone had been there with her, close enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator, close enough to watch her without her knowing. She replayed the memories of that night, searching for anything that had felt off. She remembered washing a single plate, the faint sound of waves outside, and a strange heaviness in the air, as if the room itself were holding its breath. She hadn't known it at the time, but she hadn't been alone. The realization shifted everything. This wasn't a story about a dangerous man from her past finding her. It was about someone else entirely, someone who had been in her life without her realizing, someone who knew the intimate details of her routine long before she ran. It explained why the harassment had begun so soon after she started over, why they knew exactly how to frighten her. This wasn't random. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about possession. Amelia's fear deepened into something colder. Whoever this was, they hadn't made a move to hurt her. Not yet. They were patient, the kind of patient that meant they were enjoying the wait. By sending the photograph, they had told her exactly what she needed to know. She was never out of their reach. She burned the picture that night in a metal mixing bowl on her balcony, watching the edges curl and blacken until it was nothing but ash. But the image remained burned into her mind. She understood now that leaving again might not matter. She could run to the farthest corner of the country, and still, somewhere, they would be watching. And above all, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was alive, but they must never know.